It gives me great pleasure to be here, and I first and foremost would like to thank Dr. Amer and her team for organizing this research day. And I also would like to thank her for inviting me to be part of her program today to speak about uh, knowledge and development, or knowledge for development. And I would like to thank our guest speaker because he touched on some of the important issues that I also interested to talk about. And he basically tried to end me with some of the challenges. I'm not going to speak about philosophy here, and I'm not going to speak about the dark ages, but I'm going basically to speak about humanity and about the future and about some of the greatest challenges that's facing us as, let's say, a global society. I'm going to speak from a view of globalization, and that every single country today is directly or indirectly linked to the global society. No country can claim to be isolated from the rest. So that's why anything happening in one place will have a spillover and impact on the rest. And that's why when we speak about these challenges, we have to think in terms of that all of us, we share this planet that we live on it. That's why anything could happen on it. It will have an impact on all of us. Now, both development and, of course, knowledge are important. Development is a very complex and multidimensional concept. And I'm going basically to speak on the division that exists today between those who have and those who have not, between those who are rich or industrialized and those who are poor. Now, as you may know, that the world is divided into two groups. The top 20% of the world population, they control about 80% of the total wealth. And here we are talking also about knowledge. And it so happened that this 20% of the people, they produce almost 80% of the total knowledge in the world. And the greatest challenges facing many countries today is not to close the income gap, but is basically to close the knowledge gap. And that's why the challenge facing many of the developing countries in order to be able to overcome some of the problems and some of the difficulties is mainly how to close the knowledge gap. And I'm going basically to identify some of the challenges facing us and what we can do in order to be able, let's say, to solve these kind of challenges. Now, she gave me only 20 minutes, but let me go to my presentation. And this is statement from the Arab Human Development Report of 2002, and it clearly said that knowledge is the cornerstone of development. And it's true. Everything we have today, and even if you look back at the last 200 years history of Western civilization, it was knowledge and science and technology that contributed to the overall development of these societies. So knowledge is an important when knowledge is important for improving productivity, for restructuring our economies, for human development. And that's why knowledge today is crucial for all of us. Now, the World Bank also speak about knowledge, and I'm sure all of you are aware there is a very important publication, and I advise everybody, if you can get hold of that, you can get it free on the internet. It's called Knowledge for Development. And in that report, they basically highlighted the importance of knowledge in the societal development. And this is an issue that I also wanted to reflect, because development here is about transformation of a society. I have just started by saying that development is a multidimensional concept. It simply means that society has to move from one stage to another. And every single stage in that movement, every dimension of development in that movement will requires knowledge. So knowledge is important for the transformation of societies from one stage to another. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is what they basically refer to knowledge and why knowledge is important. Now, uh, knowledge empower people. Those of you who are familiar with the concept of what we call human development is about increasing people capabilities, basically to increase productivity. Knowledge is to promote innovation. And today we are, of course, speaking about knowledge-based economy. And all the countries in this part of the world are thinking of converting their economies into a knowledge base. And innovation, of course, is critical for the overall development of the knowledge economy. Innovation is about creativity and is about, let's say, in productivity. And last week, Professor Shauki was talking about research and development, and everybody here was talking about research and development. And one way to promote innovation in society is through research and development. So that's why the role of universities are crucial and critical. Now, there are so many aspects related to knowledge, and now the OECD just published a very interesting study. And in that study, they basically highlighted some of the greatest challenges facing humanity between now and 2050. And these are to be shared by everybody. So they talk about demography. I think our guest talked about population. They're expecting that populations to be 10 billion people by the year 2050. Imagine that you have 10 billion people. How much energy do you need? How much food do you need? How much water you need? Now, we live on a planet with limited resources. And these resources can only provide, let's say, the basic need for limited kind of resources. So they identify from natural resources to energy to globalization and to society at large. So these are some of the issues that they trying to basically find solution to. Now it is also important to keep in mind that in 2015 the United Nations they adopted what they call the Millennium Development Goals. And they identified 17 of these goals as of being the greatest challenges facing humanity. And the first 7 or 8 of these goals are basically related to poverty and eradication of poverty. You know, there's tremendous amount of debate and discussion in the literature. And they come to the conclusion that the greatest basically problem facing humanity is poverty. And they're talking about that if you cannot solve poverty, you will not be able basically to have peace and security in the world. So that's why half of these 17 goals is related to poverty eradication. Now, these are some of these. The goals are about the people, end of poverty and hunger. It's about the planet and the environment, because all these 17 goals are directly linked to sustainable development. And sustainability is crucial. Sustainability, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, simply mean basically management of the resources in order to meet the basic need not only for us, but also for the future generation to come. So this is a challenge for humanity. Then it is about prosperity. All resources have to be shared, and there must be some element of justice and equity. And then without peace, you won't be able basically to survive. And then they talk about a partnership. which simply means that no nation will be in a position today to solve its own problem. So partnership has become crucial and critical for the overall development. We speak about cooperation and collaboration, universities and societies. So partnership is important for solving some of these problems. Now, the goals that related directly to poverty, eradicate extreme poverty, achieve universal primary education. And education, of course, is an important for human development, and education is a key driver for modern societies. Education is important because it empowers people and help them to become more productive, more creative, and more innovative. And then child mortality and the diseases, and then, of course, again, global partnership. Now, these are some of the data that they come with to basically explain, let's say, the proportion of population living on less than $1 or $2 a day. It is estimated that 1 billion people today, they live on less than $1.25. I mean, imagine you are one of them. I mean, how can you live on $1.25? And you just think in terms of the challenges facing these people. And then this is the division. Almost half of Africa, it is in this category, where the majority of the people are poor and they live on less than $1.25. Now, population of urban, and this is another challenge. They're expecting by the year 2050 that 80% of the world population will be living in an urban center. And this simply means will put a tremendous amount of pressure on the resources. And in terms of energy, food, water, and other services provided by the government. So urbanization has become another important kind of challenge facing many countries around the world. And they're expecting by 2020 that the resources in order to produce food will be just enough for, let's say, meeting the basic need of the population. So the challenges for the future is how we will be in a position to increase food production to meet the basic need of the increasing or the rapid growth in population. And that's what they talk about. That by 2050, we're going to have 10 billion people. And the food production need to be increased by 70%. Now, just think in terms of the availability of resources that we need in order to produce or double the amount. They are also estimating that water has to be increased by about 55%. Now, they always come to the conclusion that the amount of water that we have today is exactly the same as the amount of water that we had 10,000 years back. So this is a great challenge for many of these countries. Now, the issues they are basically talking about in terms of, you see, nearly 800 million still suffer from hunger. There are so many people, most of them basically in Asia and Africa. Now, education and schoolings are very important. It's almost, you see, 90 million children in the world today. They don't have access to school. Now, it's also important to think in terms 663 million still use unimproved water. Water is important and crucial. There are lots of people who still don't have access to water resources. And in terms of the food and the fish and the water, it is basically totally now the forest is another dimension of these challenges. They are estimating that if Indonesia continue to cut the forest at the current rate, in 40 years, 60% of the forest in the country will disappear. But you also have to think in terms of the impact of, um, let's say, cutting these forests on climate change. Now, one of the greatest challenges of probably facing these countries, as I mentioned, is basically how to close the knowledge gap. And there are many ways to think about closing the knowledge gap. You can acquire knowledge, you can absorb knowledge, you can communicate knowledge. See, knowledge today is available to everybody. Knowledge is not cheap to produce, and knowledge can be accessed because of the modern technologies, and in particular the internet. Now you can access to knowledge, of course, to global knowledge, and acquire and producing knowledge at home. And this is extremely important to think in terms of, let's say, what they call the indigenous kind of knowledge. Now, absorbing knowledge, of course, education as a lifelong process, and this is the new approach for promoting education and producing knowledge, building capacity for knowledge-based economy. And here, the universities, of course, play very important role in terms of the skills, in terms of the training, in terms of the competences, that in terms of the research and development that is needed to be. And then, of course, the role of the institution of society is also important. There are so many dimensions related basically to knowledge production. Then access to knowledge, and as I mentioned at the beginning, that we live in this global age, and countries can build infrastructure in order to be able to have access to knowledge. And the sources for access to knowledge could be through international trade, foreign direct investment, technology transfer, and of course, you need to have a knowledge, basically national knowledge policy, which is very important. Now, um, they always speak about the technologies for the future, and these are some of the important, let's say, trends as far as technology is concerned. They speak about the digital technology, they speak about biotechnology, and of course, energy has become very important. We always speak about education matters, that is knowledge and education, and we speak about knowledge infrastructure. You need to build infrastructure, investment in people, which is the greatest investment that any society can have. It is investment in people. That's why the most successful countries today are those who really invested in, let's say, human capital or investing in people. And then you need, of course, to create knowledge. Now, I was talking to Professor Fuad yesterday, and it's interesting because there is lots of debate and discussion on whether this model that has been used in many of the developing countries is applicable, in particular in the field of education. And there are a number of studies came out of the OECD, and they critical of some of these models that has been implemented in many of the developing countries. And their conclusion comes to the fact that many universities throughout the developing world were established on the Western model during the colonial era, rather than being developed indigenously in cultures in which they were located. And I think this is crucial and critical. We always speak about indigenous knowledge. We always speak about the environment. We always speak about localization. And all these are basically important. Now I will finish. Now, this is what the world looks like in 2050. And you will see China will come on the top, and then India second, and the United States is third. These are basically the share of countries or regions spending on research and development, and you can see that the Middle East In 2014 and 2016, they only allocate about 2.2% of their gross national product to research and development. But research and development is important, as we mentioned before. You know, we speak about knowledge and we speak about the green revolution. And I suppose most of you know what is the green revolution. These are basically the distribution of public expenditure on, and these are some of important, let's say, uh, outcome that came out of what we call the green revolution. Thank you very much.